Welcome to the 7th edition of the Halifax Black Film Festival, created by Fabian Collis Foundation, presented by TD in collaboration with Global News. HBFF 23 runs from February 24th to 28th, 2023, online and in person. You can find the complete program and grab your online all-access pass and individual tickets on halifaxblackfilm.com. Okay. The Black Market Series is presented by Bell Fund and co-presented by the Halifax Regional Library, and sees industry professionals discuss today's most critical industry and social issues. Thank you all for joining us today. My name's Corey Bowles, and I'm a writer-director and sometimes actor from Nova Scotia, currently living in Toronto. And before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that those of us who are attending the festival physically are meeting in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and this territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. In some cases, such as this, many of us are meeting from other parts of the nation, ranging from coast to coast, and we would encourage you to reflect on the land you are currently on, who the traditional keepers of the land are, and what the treaty relationship is, or if it's unceded territory, and how we can contribute to any reconciliation that we have to offer. Great. Today's panel is entitled, Can Writers Thrive Outside the Big Cities? Los Angeles, New York, Vancouver, Toronto, these days Atlanta, are some of the cities that best represent the entertainment industry in North America. And every year you see throngs of people moving into any one of these places to chase their dreams, to follow and pursue their work and succeed in the industry. For years, people told us it was impossible or said it was impossible to thrive outside of those big cities. And the question is, does that still apply today? Has that ever really applied? And will it apply in the future? We have the pleasure of speaking with a great number of panelists today. I'd love to introduce you to Giselle Miller, a writer, actor, and filmmaker based in Vancouver. She's been nominated for 2 Leo Awards for her web series Young, Single, and Black, and is currently in development with her first feature, Sweet Plantain, which she is currently taken to the European film market, where she's in Berlin, where she's joining us today. Hi, Giselle. Abdul Malik, screenwriter, a Canadian-Pakistani screenwriter based out of Toronto and Edmonton, brings his background in the labor movement as an organizer and photojournalist to the wonderful world of film. He's a co-writer of the Tribeca premiering Peace by Chocolate, a writer for CTV's Transplant, the upcoming telefilm-funded feature Queen Tut, and is in development with Shaftesbury, Husk Media, Lark Productions, Circle Blue Entertainment, Sphere Media, and probably by the time this is over, about 7 other companies and production companies. Abdul's a graduate of the Canadian Film Centre. Israel Akanem, an award-winning storyteller at a young age. His grandmother introduced him to the art of storytelling. It quickly became his passion. His IMDb page lists over 20 writing and directing credits, including the award-winning Drown the Lovers, Kill Your Masters, and Dirge. Israel believes the story properly told can change the world one person at a time, and is currently making great strides out there in the world. I'm seeing his name everywhere, and it's really awesome to see. Finally, we have Nikki Martin, writer, yoga teacher, facilitator, award-winning, of course, a published novelist, having released the first 2 novels in her Awake While Dreaming series. Her first short film, A Walk in the Sun, premiered at the Finn Atlantic Film Festival in 2022. Her first feature film script, The Space Between, won the RBC Script Development Prize in that festival that same year. I kill you. Her voice lies in stories that search for identity, place in the world, and the complexity of relationships. A passionate advocate for diversity in yoga and wellness, she co-founded the Black Wellness Co-op, which brings wellness resources to underserved community. Thank you. Let's get to it. So, we're talking about, succeeding outside of the centers, or if we even have to. What I would love to know is, I'd love to hear a tiny bit about each one of your journeys, how you started, and we'll keep it brief, just how your region influenced you, and how you basically started to make strides breaking out, if that's okay, if that makes sense. And we'll start with you, Giselle, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to start. I would just want to apologize in advance.
Uh-oh.
Sorry about that. There's a call coming in. There's an event happening in my hotel, so I'm just outside. So there might be street noises, but I'll say a little bit about my journey. I felt a little awkward on this topic because I was one of those people that moved to the big city in order to pursue my writing career. Before that, I was like Nikki. Well, not like Nikki, but I did write a manuscript for a novel, and I spent years trying to get that published and couldn't. So I pivoted to screenwriting, and knowing that Vancouver was such a hub, and I was very close to Vancouver at the time, living very close. And so Vancouver was a huge film hub. So many productions go to Vancouver to shoot films and TV series. And so I decided to move to Vancouver to pursue my filmmaking career. And from that, I just started applying to programs, screenwriting programs, workshops, Women in the Director's Chair. And and then I started getting into those programs, and things just started to happen. It just started to get the ball rolling, and now I'm in development on a feature film, which is exciting, and I'm in Berlin at the film market. So yeah, like that, and that's my journey. So like I chose to move to the big city, but for sure, I certainly don't think it is an absolute necessity. But we'll get into that later. Thank you.
Great. That's great. That's wonderful. And we'll actually go back to that because I think it's a really important. We'll be able to talk about both the experience of actually actively getting there and making things happen, and choosing to not go, or being able to access the resources. So this is really good. Abdul.
Yeah, hey, I actually did the opposite of a lot of people because I dropped out of film school and then moved to Edmonton, Alberta, where I spent basically spent my 20s working as a labor organizer. And I did it because, well, there were a lot of reasons I did it, but for a big reason was I didn't feel like I had a story worth telling. And I, worked in these small towns, working with like nurses and people like basically who needed help with their work site, communications, organizing, all sorts of stuff. And yeah, it's interesting because rural Canada has given me so much. If you can call Edmonton rural, I my spouse is real like rural Albertan family that I came into, and when I emerged from it, I did have a lot of stories worth telling, and I did know who I was. And I got very lucky, with my career because a friend from film school reached out. He said, "Yeah, you want to interview to write a movie?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And pushed that along. I ended up writing it. It got a Tribeca premiere, but it's interesting because I was talking to a lot of agencies when that film came out. It premiered at Tribeca, and my career was sort of on the up. And they were like, "Oh, so when are you going to move to Toronto?" And I'm like, "That's easier said than done." And I was very lucky to find an agent who was going to support me through making it work in both cities. And that was super, super important. And even now, I know the goal is still eventually to be back in Toronto, but yeah, I've somehow made it work for now. It's not easy, but it can be done, and there's a lot of issues that I'm sure we'll get into about it as well. You're muted, Corey.
Of course, I'm always muted. Yes. Thank you for that. Nikki, how about you?
Hi. Yeah, so I guess the short version is that I wrote in my early and mid 20s a number of books. I got into writing screenplays because I believed, that they would get made into movies, and I wanted to be in charge of how that looked. And so I just sort of self-taught myself, and probably that's why many of those stories are still sitting in a file somewhere. But I tried very hard to be published. I tried very hard to convince people to look at my writing, and it broke my heart when it never happened. I lived not far from Toronto at the time, and it just wasn't meant to be. And so I put all my writing away. I moved to the East Coast to finish school. And living out here has just been kind of a dream, being in nature and having access to the ocean. And it's sort of led me back to having this voice that I wanted to share and speak. I found my way back to being creative and wanting to describe the world in these beautiful terms in the way that I kind of witnessed and saw it out here. And so that's when I got back into writing. And was fortunate enough to come into contact with my publisher online, actually. So she's in Clarksville, Tennessee. So I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more, but that sort of started my journey. And, I met Israel online, even though we live in the same city during a lockdown. And so he came across my writing and very quickly wanted to work with me in some capacity. And that's sort of how, all these many years later, maybe I don't need to say how many, but I've sort of found my way back to being able to share my stories new and a couple old. And so, yeah, I'm still on the East Coast. I'm still inspired every day by being here. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thanks for that. Israel.
Yeah. Well, Nova Scotia is home. It's going to be home for a very long time. And my background has been, well, I'm originally from Nigeria. So I moved to Canada a couple of years ago. And then I found out that there were buddies that would kind of give you money to go and make a film. And I was like, what? Mind blown. And I just jumped on the opportunity because this filmmaking has always been something I always wanted to do. And now being given this opportunity, I just jumped up on it. And I love repeating things, and that is how I learn. I learn by repeating and doing it over and over and over again. And in the last couple of years, I've been lucky enough to make some stuff and then learning about, I guess, the more producing back of filmmaking. And that's how I was lucky to meet Nikki. Has amazing stories to tell, and now we're working on telling some of those stories together. So that's just been my journey from Nigeria, moving here, and then getting all these wonderful opportunities. But Nova Scotia is home, and I'm here.
Thank you for that. I mean, it's just so interesting. I'm glad we did this first because it really gives us, it shows you how broad a scope all of these experiences are. And for a lot of people who will be watching this, for some people, they'll be emerging, they'll be trying to figure out what are their next steps. And that's what I kind of want to jump into is, of course, this festival will be taking place in the area of Halifax. So there'll be a lot of people there who are, it's a hub for sure. It's starting, but, a lot of times they'll see what is the bigger thing and how is the connectivity there. And what I find is what do you challenges do you each face as a local writer or creator, also given the subject matter that you're working with and how that fits into the community that you're working out of now? And I'll actually go to you, Nikki, if that's okay. Because you talk about being inspired by where you are and the community around you. And have you found, you've obviously found your creative partners. Are you finding the access is coming quicker the more?
What was the last part? Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
I said, sorry, my headphone went out. I said, since you got this particular connection, have you found things have moved? They seem to have moved at a quicker pace for you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think, it's a couple things. And I guess I'm fortunate, obviously, as a yoga teacher, I also have this practice of patience and mindfulness and just sort of maybe recognizing timing and all things, or sometimes things just in their own time, I guess is a better way to put it. So I'm very driven. I love telling stories. It's also how I teach. I translate the world that way. And so this last couple years feels like I have 20 years sitting in a bank of effort and heartbreak and all of this stuff waiting to come to fruition. And so when things started rolling in this last year, it was just an opportunity to kind of capitalize on it in some ways. I think as well, having a number of stories sitting in the bank means that I can pull stuff out and work on that takes a lot less effort than writing something from scratch, which is kind of nice. And I've really been amazed and astounded by the community here. Like I've just been surrounded by these insanely creative, but also generous with their thoughts and feedback and insight individuals. And I know that's maybe I've had a really positive experience that might not be reflective necessarily of a greater whole industry wide, but certainly I've been fortunate enough to be in these few circumstances, Film 5 and then the RBC Script Development Program, where, you know, people just showed up to contribute, to listen, to give, to receive. And so I feel like I've really got to celebrate these people and also be celebrated in ways that has been a really lovely introduction and beginning. And it feels also like, you know, our first story is a story about an interracial couple. And it feels like people are really wanting to hear, you know, what we have to say about that and what our perspective is and how this story might be valuable in the current state of the world. And I think that's really cool and exciting. And I certainly feel humbled by it, that experience as well.
Nice. Thanks. Giselle, you mentioned earlier, you know, you actually did, you know, move yourself to a place that had the opportunities and the resources that you were looking for. Let's just go back to, you know, talking about access again and how, what was that like for you? Were you surprised when you started being able to get that access, or were there things that you discovered that you just didn't even know about once you got to Vancouver?
Yeah, I mean, I was living in the suburbs before, and there were a lot of things. You hit the nail on the head. Like, I didn't know that I was just living like, you know, I don't come from a creative family, so I didn't have this like network of people that like were in this field, and so, or even writers, and so, you know, there was a lot of things that I just wasn't aware that was available to me when I moved to Vancouver and started meeting people in the industry who were telling me to apply for this program. You know, there's this fund. I go to networking events and I meet people from TELUS, and they're like, "Oh, we have a fund available if you want to do, you know, short documentary or things like that." And people started to expose me to all of these other avenues that I could pursue to get my projects made and seen by people. And so yeah, it was just like really tapping into the network, tapping into the people who had the knowledge, and in finding those people and finding events where I could meet those people and get in front of those people. Like that wasn't happening where I was. That wasn't happening in the suburbs where I was staying. So I felt like I had to move to Vancouver to make things happen for myself. And I don't regret the choice, because I really think moving to Vancouver was the catalyst for so much of the progress. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't be where I am right now.
Excellent. Thank you. Abdul, you've been having a busy year and a half, you know, jumping around, you know, Toronto to do your work there with the CFC, you know, going back to Edmonton, you know, shooting a movie, and, you know, is in Quebec that takes place in Nova Scotia, you know, living there as well. Tell me about how that has, you know, you touched on it as well as being in rural. Tell me how that's actually affected your momentum, actually moving to the different centers and just, you know, landing in each one, and what are your experiences like there?
Definitely gives you a lot of perspective, I think, which it's hard to find in one place. You know, I was encouraged to drop out of film school and live my life by a professor of mine, right? Who was like, you don't want to be a 20-something who has no idea what he's doing with his life, writing endless scripts about 20-somethings who have no idea what they're doing with their lives, right? And that was like a big motivator for what pushed me out of Toronto, on top of the fact that I felt like I could go nowhere. But it's interesting, because it's like now I feel like I have a ton of perspective and lived experience and a lot of like connections and understanding of sort of the place we're in, the place we're on, and just a cool story, right? Like I think that counts for a lot. It's just having a narrative that sort of to Nikki's point, actually, like a narrative about yourself and about what you create and what you're interested in that's like worth cherishing. How and also like it gives you an advantage, I think, in a lot of ways to be like, I know certain geographies better than a lot of other people do, right? And certain sort of narratives and sort of bits and pieces about the country. But at the same time, it's always tough because you leave your partner for 7 months at a time or 4 months at a time. You have to be in Toronto and you have to pay Toronto rent, or in my case, I'm very lucky. I can stay with family, right? Not everyone has that luxury, and stuff like that. You always need to remind people you're there. I mean, you always need to remind people you exist because you're not close to like where the networking is and stuff like that. So that's always been like the setup and payoff. But at the same time, not knowing other people exist, that can be great because you just sort of don't have that anxiety about who you're competing with. So there's like pluses and minuses for sure.
Yeah, right on. It's interesting that the whole, reminding people you're there, which leads me to Israel. This is great leading into you. I mean, you have dug in where you are. You've managed to really, create a voice and a platform for your work. You've created a platform for other artists. You've really, in the last few years, you've really had an interesting evolution. And of course, you've managed to, access outside of the province as well. My question to you is, when you cementing yourself in a community versus how you feel you're either portrayed or seen outside of the community, is that a surprise to you when you meet or network? And I guess to be more specific to that, how do you find now? How do you find your opportunities being presented to you, or how you're presenting your own opportunities in Halifax the way you're doing? How does it get to the point you're at now, which is, getting astronomical, really? No, I mean,
Thanks, Curry.
really.
Yeah, I think first off, community is super important, and for me, having a place like AFCOOP, having a place like Screen Nova Scotia, and just reading up on things that people like yourself have done. So my whole thing is like looking at someone I guess love their career, what they've done, and trying to create that, use that as a blueprint for what I'm doing. um First off, the whole thing about Nova Scotians being kind isn't like a prank, it's just the truth. And it extends into film where, not mentioning names, there are places where you go to and you kind of feel like othered or so. It isn't as much here where everyone is super welcoming, everyone is trying to be helpful, everyone is saying, have you tried this? Have you talked to this person? Oh, I read this script. That person might be able to give you a tip on this. Or so having that is a little bit, it spoils you a little bit, living in Nova Scotia. So when something happens and you have an opportunity to go to Toronto or wherever, and it's like where everyone is just trying to be the, I guess, the centerpiece of it all, and it's not all like let's all try to rise up together. I think it's a really bit jarring for me. So and the thing, there is at the North Public Library here in Halifax, there is this, I guess, statue of someone dropping their hand and then pulling someone up, and that is just how it feels here. It's like, okay, so I've done film 5, I have an idea of how it works, great, I'm just going to be able to either volunteer my time to like teach at a workshop or try and form another team that I feel might work great together, and they'll be telling their own story. And my whole thing is kind of when I meet someone and I believe they have like a unique voice or a unique story they want to tell. I'm not thinking of that story that we want to tell together. I'm always thinking like 4 years, 5 years from now. So it's like I'm kind of lucky that I get to meet people like Nikki, where they have this bank of stories. So it's like, okay, we have this one, we can start developing that one. So it's like, while this we have this momentum, we're just going to keep it going. And the momentum, honestly, I think for me, when I came to Halifax, I came just when everyone was moving away, because like the tax credit was gone and things were not working. So for me, everything then just seems better, right? I came in when it was really, really bad, and then things just started getting better. So I don't have an idea of when it was like, all the shows came to shoot here. And it's like, for me now, when you get a newsletter from Screen Nova Scotia saying, oh, this show is coming to shoot here and this show is coming to, I'm like, why do I want to leave though? Also, Toronto is just too busy for me. And so it's like, if I have the opportunity to go there to do a work like Abdul, I'll go there, do that work. But there's this whole thing when you're coming that staycase and you see that big Halifax sign at the airport, it just feels like, yeah, I'm home. And that's just how it feels to me. So that I'm lucky enough that I get to create, and I get to create with people I love, people I appreciate, people I look up to. I just count it as a blessing, man. And it's great. It's great. And I get to do it in this. Also, Halifax is beautiful too. So I'm being biased, but yeah. So I guess that's how I see it.
Right on. Well, now, going back to that, you had mentioned how you and Nikki had met online, and which is a really interesting thing. Do any of you find it different? Obviously, things are different. Have you been able to find other opportunities because of how the world changed in the last few years, where we're having a sort of there's the centers, but there's also a connection where we're doing more this way, where we're meeting people more through the computer? Has that helped any of you lately?
I would not have a career if it wasn't for Zoom and the pandemic, which it sucks to be like this global catastrophe is also the reason I have a job doing what I want to do, right? But like, yeah, it was very much, everything when you're not in Toronto, everything seems very inaccessible, right? People were very obsessed with like in-person meetings. People look at you funny when you're like, I'm in Edmonton. It's like, okay, when are you coming to Toronto, right? And stuff like that. And there's a value to in-person connection. Like, I don't want to diminish it. And I'm slowly discovering that as I sort of go between two cities, living and working in two places at once. But at the start, when the pandemic happened, all of a sudden everything moved online. It's like, oh, why have I never heard of you before? We really love your writing. We really love your sample script. Like, who are you? Let's talk, right? And those were the kinds of meetings I was having pretty much from the moment I signed an agent. And it's again, like, I feel very fortunate and privileged in that position, but I think about how much that's repeated across every other city where you have just a plethora of talent without access to these centers, who, especially as we move back to in-person, will lose, even the opportunity to access it, or just haven't gotten to a point where they can get it in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Giselle, being in Vancouver, have you found it what have been the challenges? You've got the opportunities that you're discovering, and the outlets and the resources. How are you finding your voice in that city? Are you feeling okay? Is it for you? What are some of the challenges, or some of the benefits, or some exciting things that have surprised you about Vancouver?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges that I face, especially when I was doing my very first web series, Young, Single, and Black, I kind of anticipated it, but I wasn't aware of the extent that this would be a challenge. But casting was a big problem for me in both season 1 and season 2 of my web series, because I had a cast of about 20 people for each season, and a majority of them were Black, and I realized that there wasn't a large talent pool of Black actors in Vancouver. In fact, Vancouver has a very small Black community, and so I faced a lot of problems, trying to cast people. I had to ask members of my family to be in my web series because I couldn't find what I needed. So that's been some of the biggest challenges I've had in Vancouver. And and yeah, like accessing funding is also a challenge. I mean, that's a challenge for everybody, no matter which city you're living in, because it's a very small pool of funds that we're all kind of applying for. But that's been a challenge as well. I think one thing I've noticed is that there are a lot of funding that goes to East Coast and not as much to the West Coast. So that's another challenge I find specifically living on the West Coast. But I think opportunity, like Abdul said, like I think Zoom really is a huge advantage for me, because I met my producer on the feature film I have in development through online, right? So we met through an organization that was just started by another BIPOC person here in Vancouver called Collective Bunch, and it's a resource for BIPOC creatives in the BC film industry. And so I found them online and the database and reached out, and we actually didn't have an in-person meeting for a year, and we were just talking over WhatsApp and Zoom, and then we finally decided to meet in person. We're like, we should probably meet in person. And it turns out we were like living in the same neighborhood, like kind of. We were living like about 10 minutes from each other, and so that was really funny. But yeah. So we were just but yeah, like there's challenges. I've experienced the challenges, but also opportunities that have come from moving to Vancouver. So and I'm grateful for both, because the challenges helped me learn, and the opportunities helped me progress in my career.
So is Vancouver the future for you? Do you plan on staying there?
For the time being, absolutely. I don't know what will happen. What the world will look like 5 years from now. But
Yeah.
for now, yes, Vancouver is where I feel where I feel I'm supposed to be.
Right on. Right on. It's interesting when you say, and this could be a whole other panel. Like when you say the East Coast funding, are you referring to Ontario Ontario, or Nova
Not
Scotia?
just Ontario, Quebec as well. There's a lot of
yeah, because that's sort of the whole lock of Quebec, Toronto, as opposed Nova Scotia feels that too as well. Like there's sort of and it's interesting because I'm not sure, from my time in Nova Scotia, which was, all of my career, it was, we were like Vancouver seemingly got more than Toronto. Would you realize that actually there was, for a long time, there's one area code, which was, 416. It's like, but it's funny as years, I noticed as years have gone by, especially, we're talking about how I think all of us have connected with our current, writing partners, producing partners, team online. I'm working with Abdul. We met online. I think it's really interesting that things have gotten smaller. And I think that's what's so interesting is that you can find someone, in two of your cases in the same place, or you can find someone, in another area code, in another country. And I think that's a really good thing for, people to know coming up that, or that are emerging, that there is opportunity there, and there's opportunities outside where you can either go, but you can also get your start or get a jump on it, just forging that connection, which is really good, and taking advantage of that. What's been, what's been the most surprising thing for you, Nikki, jumping into all this?
I think maybe it's a couple things. I think for myself, some of it is just like the groundedness in it. And maybe, again, that's because I worked so hard to get over being brokenhearted that I was never going to be a successful writer. And I sort of had to talk to myself about being a writer because I'm a writer, not because someone else decides I'm a writer, and what that life would look like. And so it's been really surprising to be, you know, able to be really present in how it's all happening. And just, it's amazing how many people are so excited about it. And I think, like, I really try to bask in that, because I think we see a lot of, you know, hard news and dark news, but on my day-to-day life, people are just really excited that I'm doing something cool. And, you know, I have these creative people around me who are interested in what I'm doing and excited by it. And, you know, they're excited to read my work because it will inspire their work, and they're excited to share their work because they want my feedback and they know that it'll inspire me. And I think that it's, after thinking it was going to be a brutal fight to convince people again to listen to me, it's been really cool that I've had these people showing up to say, we want to hear what you have to say. And, you know, having allies and advocates, you know, getting to work with Israel. Israel's just been such a huge fan of mine and what I do and how I speak and how I share. And I think about, you know, there's a few times a week I pause, and especially with my sister, because we're creating together as well, to just think like how lucky we are that we found this human who is for us and who's out there fighting for our vision and our voice. And it's just, you know, surprisingly wonderful to be in it, and to also be able to pause and reflect on it, you know, day after day, because otherwise it would just be passing me by.
Israel, you know, it's a good segue into this. You know, you've you know, like you said, you've moved into producing, and you know, you've found a sort of place to put some focus in. Do you plan on, you know, expanding that palette for yourself, and you know, picking up other emerging talent, and you know, other, you know, and I won't say, you know, first time writers, because everybody on the panel is so experienced, and it's a really good example of, you know, where we find a lot of talent in places we don't necessarily realize is right there in front of us. Are you planning on continuing that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I found my lane. You know, I mean, I had a discussion with someone. I said I'm always gonna write and direct. Like, I'm writing something now, and I want to shoot a short soon, so I'm always gonna do that. But I think, you know, being in this place, and like, so the thing. I mean, I started the last couple of questions with seeing all the awesome things that Nova Scotia has done, but I don't really think I know any black producer. And that was the thing I struggled with, because I'll write a story and I'll send to someone. I was like, okay, you know, I've done all these things and I'm kind of struggling with, say, Talent to Watch or whatever. And, you know, having your name on this application would be great. But then they wouldn't get that story. You know, I just like, the things they want to change is the whole point of the story. Like, and you know, being a producer now, I get it myself that, oh, you know, that, but once you understand the essence of that story, there are just some things you cannot change. That, like, then if you change it, then there's no stories. Like, it doesn't matter if you get the funding. I'm not gonna make the film I wanted to make. And that's why I just said, okay, I'm just gonna go, I'm direct. And sorry, I'm getting to producing. And like, yeah, I've been doing that on my own project myself. But then even with Nikki's script, I remember, you know, like, Nikki actually wrote a huge script, and I was like, okay, wait, we'll make this someday, but let's shrink it. I'll make a short film, show people what this film could look like, and it will be great for film 5. And Nikki did that. And then once we go into film 5, I'm like, by the way, you need to expand it again, because it is really going to be a feature. And when we got into the program, there was the essence of this character that just, you know, some people got it, but some people just couldn't get it. And I was like, oh yeah, I see why I want to be a producer now, because there are just some things that culturally will not translate. And so, you know, is this interracial relationship, and people felt like the black lady wasn't suffering enough. I'm like, are you insane? Like, she's black, like, she's a black woman in North America. Are you like, what do you want her to, like, she's already crying, you know? So things like that is why I think I'll do more producing. And talking of that, like, there's a group of South Asians, like they're Indian, and then I've read this beautiful story. I was like, holy shit! Like I can't touch it because I'm not from there, but I through what I do here and through how amazing and community based Nova Scotia is, I saw this wonderful lady that has like has the, I guess, the characteristics of being a great producer, and she couldn't believe that she could do that. But I was like, you know what? I think the two of you together would be a great team. Go ahead, just apply. And then they got into Film 5, and they're gonna make that film this April. And that's kind of what I'm seeing myself. I'm like, oh man, you and this person will work great together. And if you need anything, just reach out to me. And I think producing might be just like looking for funding, but sometimes it might just be like introducing to people that will form a mega awesome team. And so, yeah, like I'm still gonna write and direct because I have all these ideas, but I think producing is where it's at, especially here in Nova Scotia, because there are just like so many beautiful stories of color that either get diluted. So, like Corey, I'm gonna say one of like your film Black Cup, there was a scene where Black Hawk just stands in front of this like the thing, like the chains, and he's just standing there. And I remember when you were talking about that place, and like people didn't understand it, and it's just like culturally you don't get it, but every black person that watched that scene understood how important it was. And I just think, I'm not saying like a producer of a different race won't understand it, but there are just some things that just fly over people, and if you don't have that cultural understanding, it might get missing. So yeah, I'm gonna do that. I get my niche, and being able to create a platform with people like, you know, Nikki's a better writer than I'll ever be. So why am I trying to be like, oh, I'm gonna write this thing? So I mean, if I can just hang on our coattails and then we go and win a big award, then I'll be like, hey, I was part of that thing. So yeah, producing is something I'm gonna do a lot of more.
Awesome. It's really good. I mean, you're touching on, really finding who your community is. And that can show itself in a number of ways, whether you will take part in, helping find other communities, find their community. And in one way, that's, how we all stay connected. And that's a really great thing. Again, pretty boundless. And I'm going to lead into this question for you, Abdul. You're in Edmonton. Edmonton has a scene out there. Are you involved in that scene out there?
I'm not. And I think there's a couple of reasons, right? Like I will say the production scene out here is amazing. You know what I mean? Like there's a huge amount of talented crew. Like The Last of Us rolled through town, and there was crew to spare, but they also trained up a ton of people, right? They trained up a lot of people who are now able to work in locations, able to work on sets, who know their way around. Like Alberta's becoming a destination, but I think sort of comprehensively the province here, and you see this, I think, in a lot of non-BC, non-Ontario, and especially non-Quebec provinces, there's no real interest in supporting above the line talent, right? Very little, almost non-existent in Alberta. Like, for every Skinamarink, I love what Kyle Ball did with that movie, an Edmonton success story, but like, he shouldn't have had to self-finance GoFundMe a film like that, because the larger supports weren't there until the film was done or whatever, right? And that's always sort of been an issue here, because like I am very much like and there's lots of talented indie filmmakers here, right? But like I'm a TV writer first and foremost. I treat writing like it's a day job, 9 to 5, clock in, clock out, take meetings, put stuff together. And it's like, to find that community, you have to be in BC or Ontario, because there's so little done to support that here on the policy and public sector end. And that's always like a big thing I try to bring up with BIPOC advocacy groups, across the country whenever I talk to them, is regional equity, lifting up regional creatives is like so important, because we need to start building these communities outside of 4 major cities, right? And especially for people who aren't, sort of working 6 years to make an indie, but like, need to write, right? Like TV is the only place for a lot of people where you can make a sustainable living. So yeah, to answer your question, like there's a community out here. I'm not super tapped into it, and it sucks because, I have a wonderful creative community in Toronto that I wish, I could emulate a bit of here, but it's like, we're all working all the time. And like, it should fall to people with infrastructure and the money to actually help set this stuff up, right? Like it would be a full-time job lobbying for this stuff here.
Thanks for that. Giselle, do you find that, are your work primarily being in Vancouver, do you find influence from, where you lived before? Do you ever plan on, incorporating that or do you ever look back basically?
Short answer is no. The long answer to that is, well, it's complicated actually, because like looking back, I mean, I was born in Jamaica, and like it's still very much a part of my identity. I was there until I was 10, and then I go back quite regularly. I was just there last month, and so I a lot of my looking back to where I lived before, when I look back, it's all the way back to my childhood. It's not necessarily to other places where I've lived. Like I used to live in Atlanta. I used to live in, and then I moved to, Canada and lived in the suburbs. But when I look back, it's always back to my roots and writing stories from that culture and that perspective, that lens. But for the most part, the work that I'm writing that's like modern day and about my contemporary life, that's reflective of my life when I lived in Vancouver, well, living in Vancouver. And so the stories that I write are from that perspective, because my web series is about Black people finding love in Vancouver and the struggle to find a partner. So yeah, like that's the perspective that I always take when I look at contemporary stories. But I wouldn't say that I'm not open to other things. So yeah.
That's great. I think that's great. Again, we'll have probably a fair number of people who, both established and emerging and first timers and people who are just, interested. What would any of you say about them, if they're watching, if they're somewhere small, it's how to, break through or where to shoot their shot, how to go about it? What's one piece of advice from all of you?
I would say that good writing stands out. So like if you're not living in a city where there's a big industry and you're trying to be either a screenwriter or TV writer, yeah, good writing will stand out. It will rise above the rest. And so focus on building your craft and like working on making yourself better and better every day. That's really key. That's important. That's what I did. I was writing every single day before I moved to the big city. Like I was just entering competitions and working on screenplays, and slowly my screenplays eventually placed, and then they started getting better coverage scores, and all the kind of stuff started to happen. But that was through the work. That was through reading screenplays and writing screenplays. So that's my biggest advice, is to focus on being excellent at the craft of writing.
And just for some people who don't know what coverage scores are.
Coverage scores is when when you submit your screenplay to like a professional, a script reader or someone in the industry, a professional who will give you feedback on your dialogue, your story, character arc, all the elements of a screenplay, and they will give you a score. And generally a couple pages of notes and on what their impression of your screenplay is. So that's the coverage, the score, and then the notes. Yeah.
We used to call it the old 7.0.
Yeah.
You're like, man, 7. Then you're like, wait a minute, 7. Give us a. Yeah, I love it. Awesome.
To sort of build off Giselle's point, I think really you have to be ready. Like, luck is a function of time, of work over opportunity, right? And you really got to put in the work for when the opportunity comes. Like, you're already racialized, which means you're going to work or othered in some way, which means you got to work like 10 times as hard, right, as a lot of people. And then because you're not living in the city, you have that both gives you a competitive advantage and a disadvantage. But, you know, the advantage is you can sort of drown out the BS, you know what I mean, and just work, right? Like, you have to work 10 times as harder as a racialized person. You have to work another 10 times harder as someone who doesn't live in a center that affords you the networking opportunities, the access to people, the access to production companies, right? And you really got to like be very pragmatic and very focused about finding your moment. But yeah, like none of this comes easy. It's a business, and you got to put in the work, and you got to make people want you and be willing to put in the money to be like, we want this person from Saskatchewan or whatever. We're going to fly them to Ontario to work, right? Like, that is the goal because that's where you'll do a lot of your work. And, you know, I think, yeah, I just to lift off of what Giselle said, because I completely agree. Just create excellent stuff and be very self-critical, because everyone is so much better than you think they are, right? Even yourself.
Yeah, and I think I would add on to that. Don't make assumptions about where opportunities are going to lie or what opportunities are going to be fruitful. You know, I think we have this attachment and these big stories that we think are going to happen, and that's what we aim for. But like, there's a lot of messy, sometimes painful little points along the way that are where the gold is like where you become really good is in how many drafts you wrote of a short film. Like, I put in so much more time on my first short than I ever put on a feature in my 20s. You know, and little did I know that all that opportunity to make this small film would be what actually led me to the biggest dream. You know, and I was so focused at times looking one way, I missed the opportunity just to do the hard work that would have made me a better writer. Which now I'm all about that hard work. And it's those moments no one sees that are so unglamorous that are really where the opportunities are starting. And you might see them in a film festival, or you might see them on a panel and in these stories, but they're really like on our couches, in our homes, by ourselves, you know, grinding away 1 a.m., 2 a.m. So just, you know, trust yourself as a writer and, you know, aim for all the opportunities. Don't scoff at anything if it's out there, because you never know.
Yeah. No, you never know. I mean, everything everyone said has been great. Like, you know, you're as good as the last thing you shared, but the work you put in over time, it pays. Because if you read a script you wrote, the first draft and the final draft that you actually show people, there's a distinctive change between the two. But at the same time, I'll also say, you know, while you're working in your, you know, home, your couch, your space, wherever it is you write, or that Starbucks coffee shop, you should also stay open to community, because especially with film, one thing I love about film is that it's super collaborative. So trying to find that community, it could be joining a co-op, it could be hanging out at a festival, it could be even like going online. There are Facebook groups, Discord, Slacks that you could join, and just reach out to other writers. And the other thing that we do, like, writing is fun, but something I'd say as a writer we need to do more of is just read. Like, so if there's a film you absolutely love, just go online and Google that script, read that script and dissect it. And, you know, be like, oh, I would have written it this way, or oh wow, okay, so that's how you write that. I remember for the longest time I didn't know how to write phone conversations in scripts, and I was like, and it was until I read a script. Oh, okay, so that's how you do that. So reading scripts of films you like is something as writers we should do. And right. The cure for writer's block is writing many things at once. So if you're writing 3, 4 scripts, you'll never have a writer's block, because once you're blocked on one script and like I don't know what is happening, you just switch over to the next one. So if you ever feel you have writer's block, start another script. But so yeah, write, read, and find your community. That's what I'm gonna say to anyone that's watching this right now.
That's amazing, everybody. Thank you. So, we heard get good, get committed, work hard, be ready, be open to where your opportunities lie, stay open to community, use all your resources. Don't be afraid to ask and read scripts. Read. There's a great site you can get almost all of the current Oscar scripts right now on a site called Go Into Story on Medium, where all stories are collected and they put a new one up every week for your consideration. It's always a really good resource. And yeah, this is wonderful. And yeah, the writer's block thing is good, except I've got a series of started scripts that I will never go back to because I've been writer blocked, and then I've forgotten my whole life and I just don't even, anyway. Look, I would really love to thank all of you for being here, and anyone that's tuned in. I really like to thank you for watching. You can, as you said, you can keep your eye out on everybody's work, and let's see where they're off to next. The Halifax Black Film Festival again runs from February 24th to 28th. And that's online and in person. For a complete program, you can grab your all access pass and individual tickets on halifaxblackfilm.com. Once again, Nikki, Giselle, Israel, Abdul, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, awesome.